When my daughter-in-law stood in front of the police officers in my own living room and told them I'd been stealing money from my late wife's estate to support a gambling addiction, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at my son David standing beside her, his face a mixture of shame and conviction, and I said 7 words that would change everything. Check the security footage from last Tuesday. The confusion on Melissa's face lasted only a second before she recovered, but I'd seen it. That flicker of panic. She didn't know about the cameras. Let me back up. My name is Robert Chen, and 4 years ago, I lost my wife Margaret to cancer. We'd been married for 37 years, built a life together in Richmond Hill just outside Toronto, raised our only son David in the same house where I still lived. Margaret was a physician, I was a civil engineer, and together we'd accumulated what most people would call a comfortable estate. The house was paid off. We had retirement savings, investments, a cottage up in Muskoka. Nothing extravagant, but we'd worked hard for it. After Margaret died, I threw myself into staying busy. I volunteered at the community center, worked part-time consulting for my old firm, spent time at the cottage. David would visit every couple weeks, and we'd have dinner, talk about his work, about his mother. It was grief, but it was manageable grief. We had each other. Then, 2 years ago, David met Melissa at a conference in Vancouver. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep, beautiful, articulate, seemed genuinely interested in our family history when David brought her to meet me that Christmas. She asked about Margaret, looked at photo albums, even cried a little when I showed her pictures from our last vacation together in Nova Scotia. "Your mother raised an incredible man," she told me that night, holding David's hand across my kitchen table. "You must be so proud." I was. I am. But something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. I pushed the feeling aside. I was just being an overprotective father, I told myself. Nobody would ever be good enough for my son in my eyes. They got engaged 6 months later. The wedding was planned for the following summer at the cottage. Something small and intimate, just family and close friends. Melissa moved into David's condo in downtown Toronto, and I saw them less frequently. But when we did get together, she was always warm, always affectionate, calling me dad and bringing me little gifts. The first crack appeared 8 months before the wedding. David called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight. "Dad, we need to talk about the cottage." "What about it?" "Well, Melissa and I have been discussing it, and we think it makes sense to transfer it to my name now. You know, for estate planning purposes. Save on probate fees later." I sat down slowly in my reading chair, the one Margaret used to curl up in with her medical journals. "David, you know your mother and I set up the estate very carefully. The cottage goes to you in the will. There's no advantage to transferring it now. Melissa's brother is an estate lawyer. He says there are significant tax advantages. Then he's wrong, or he's misleading you. I worked with our lawyer extensively on this." There was a pause. "Dad, are you saying you don't trust Melissa's family?" "I'm saying I trust the lawyer who's handled our affairs for 25 years. The conversation ended badly. David was cold. Melissa apparently hurt that I wouldn't consider their input. We didn't speak for 2 weeks. When we finally had dinner together again, Melissa apologized. "I overstepped," she said, touching my hand across the table at the restaurant. "It's just that I want to help. I know how overwhelming estate management can be, especially at your age." At my age. I was 63 at the time. Healthy, sharp, working 20 hours a week by choice, not necessity. But I let it go. The second incident happened 3 months later. I came home from volunteering at the community center to find David and Melissa in my house. They had a key for emergencies, but this wasn't an emergency. "We were just organizing some of Mom's things," David said, gesturing to the boxes they'd pulled from the basement. "Melissa thought we should donate her clothes, her books. You don't need to live surrounded by reminders." I kept my voice level. "Those are my reminders to organize when I'm ready. It's been 3.5 years, Dad, and there's still my things in my house." Melissa stood up, tears in her eyes. "We're just trying to help you move forward. This isn't healthy." I asked them to leave. David was angry, accusing me of being stuck in the past, of pushing away people who cared about me. I noticed that some of Margaret's jewelry boxes were open. Items moved around. Nothing was missing, as far as I could tell, but the violation felt deliberate. That night, I called an old friend, James Patterson, a retired lawyer I'd known since university. I told him about the cottage conversation, about finding them in my house. "Robert," he said carefully, "I don't want to alarm you, but I've seen this pattern before. How much does Melissa know about your finances?" "Just what David knows. The general picture. Keep it that way. And document everything. Every conversation, every interaction. If this is what I think it is, you're going to need evidence." I didn't believe him at first. My son wouldn't let anyone take advantage of me. But I ordered security cameras anyway, the kind that upload to the cloud, installed them discreetly throughout the house. I told myself it was for general security, that I was being paranoid. The cameras caught everything. 2 weeks after I installed them, David and Melissa visited for Sunday dinner. I'd made pot roast, Margaret's recipe, and we were having a pleasant enough evening when Melissa brought up the cottage again. "David's been thinking," she said, passing the potatoes. "We'd like to get married there in June, like we planned, but we're worried about the liability. What if a guest gets hurt? What if there's an accident? With the property in your name, you could be sued for everything." I set down my fork. "The cottage has liability insurance. It always has. But at your age, if something happened, if you had medical bills, they could put a lien on the property. We'd lose it anyway." She reached across the table, her face a mask of concern. "We just want to protect what Mom built, what you both built. By taking it from me, while I'm still alive?" David stood up abruptly. "That's not what she's saying. Why do you always twist her words?" "I'm not twisting anything. I'm being asked to sign over property I own. We're asking you to protect it." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. He was afraid. But of what? They left shortly after, Melissa crying, David cold and distant. I went to my computer and reviewed the camera footage from earlier, when I'd been in the kitchen and they'd been briefly alone in the living room. The audio was clear enough. "This isn't working," David had said, his voice low. "He's not budging. He will. We just need to increase the pressure. Trust me. I've done this before." I replayed that sentence 5 times. "I've done this before." The next morning, I called James. "I need you to look into someone for me. Melissa Chen, formerly Melissa Thornton, originally from Calgary. I need to know everything." It took him 3 days. What he found made my blood run cold. Melissa had been married before, to a man named Richard Thornton. Richard's father had died 2 years into their marriage, leaving Richard as the sole beneficiary of a considerable estate, including a house in Calgary and commercial properties. Within a year, Melissa had convinced Richard that his father had mismanaged the finances, that they needed to liquidate everything and reinvest. By the time Richard realized what was happening, Melissa had transferred most of the assets into joint accounts, and then into accounts under her sole name. She'd left him with almost nothing, and the divorce had been finalized just months before she met David. Richard had tried to file charges, but Melissa had been careful. Everything had been signed willingly, if under false pretenses. The police couldn't prove fraud, and Richard couldn't afford the lawyers to fight her in civil court. "There's more," James told me on the phone. "She has a brother, but he's not an estate lawyer. He's a paralegal, and he was disbarred in British Columbia for ethical violations. And Robert, the timeline is concerning. She didn't meet David randomly at a conference. She'd been working for a pharmaceutical company that was trying to recruit from his engineering firm. She had access to employee information, including benefits and family details. You're saying she targeted him. I'm saying it's a possibility you need to consider." I sat in Margaret's chair for a long time after that call, looking at our wedding photo on the mantel. My wife had been many things: brilliant, compassionate, occasionally stubborn, but she'd always had exceptional instincts about people. I remembered now, just before she died, she'd made me promise something. "Don't let anyone take advantage of David," she'd whispered, her voice weak from the morphine. "He's brilliant with numbers and terrible with people. He trusts too easily. Promise me you'll watch out for him." I'd promised. and I'd failed to see what was happening right in front of me. But I wasn't failing anymore. Over the next few weeks, I documented everything. Every phone call, every text message, every visit. The cameras caught Melissa going through my mail when she thought I was in the bathroom. They caught her photographing documents in my home office. They caught her and David arguing in hushed voices about the timeline and how much longer they had to wait. Then came the Wednesday that changed everything. I came home from the community center to find David, Melissa, and 2 police officers in my living room. My first thought was that something terrible had happened to someone. Then I saw Melissa's face, tear-stained and afraid, and I knew. Mr. Chen, one of the officers said, a young woman with a kind face that didn't match the severity in her voice. We've received a complaint that you've been engaging in financial elder abuse. Specifically, that you've been withdrawing large sums of money from accounts that belonged to your late wife and that were meant to be held in trust for your son. I looked at David. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That's a serious allegation, I said calmly. What evidence supports this? Melissa stood up, shaking. I have bank statements, withdrawals of $15,000, $20,000 at a time. David's father has been gambling, losing money at casinos in Niagara Falls and online. He's blown through nearly $200,000 in the past year. $200,000, I repeated. From which accounts? From the investment accounts, the ones Mom set up. I turned to the police officers. May I show you something? I led them to my home office, pulled up my computer, and opened my banking portal. Every account, every transaction, fully documented and legitimate. Withdrawals had been made, yes, but every single one was accounted for. Money transferred to my RRSP. Money donated to the hospital foundation in Margaret's name. Money used to repair the cottage roof. Money invested in a GIC for David's eventual inheritance. These statements Melissa is referring to, I said, pulling up the documents, are from a joint account I shared with my wife. I'm the primary account holder. I have every legal right to manage these funds, and as you can see, they've been managed responsibly. The police officers looked at the records, then at Melissa, then at David. Is there any evidence of gambling? The younger officer asked. That's when I said it. Check the security footage from last Tuesday. Confusion rippled across Melissa's face. What security footage? I pulled up the camera feed from the previous week. There, in perfect HD clarity, was Melissa in my office, photographing my bank statements with her phone. But she hadn't photographed all of them, just the ones showing withdrawals, not the ones showing where the money had gone. She's been building a false narrative, I said quietly, manufacturing evidence of financial abuse that doesn't exist. David's face had gone white. Dad, you have cameras in the house? I installed them 3 months ago, after I found you both going through your mother's things without permission, after the repeated pressure to sign over property. After I started to worry about exactly this scenario, I pulled up another clip. Melissa and David in my living room. Melissa coaching him. When we talk to the police, you have to seem convinced. You have to believe he's sick, that he's not thinking clearly. Your grief over your mother, combined with concern for your father's mental state, that's what sells it. The room went very quiet. There's more, I said. And I told them everything James had found about Melissa's previous marriage, about Richard Thornton, about the pattern of financial manipulation and exploitation. David sat down heavily on my office chair, his head in his hands. The police officers took statements from all of us. Melissa tried to claim the videos were doctored, that I was the one manipulating the situation. But her story kept changing, contradicting itself. They left with copies of everything, told us they'd be in touch. After they were gone, Melissa turned on David. Are you just going to let him do this? He's destroying our future. Our future? David's voice was hollow. What about Richard Thornton's future? What about his father's estate? That has nothing to do with us. You told me you'd never been married before. It wasn't relevant. You lied to me about everything. He stood up slowly, and I saw something break in his eyes, the final thread of whatever delusion he'd been clinging to. Get out, David. Get out of my father's house. Get out of my life. She left, still protesting, still trying to spin the narrative, but even she must have known it was over. David and I sat in silence for a long time after she was gone. Finally, he spoke. How long have you known? That she was dangerous? A few months. That something was wrong? Since the first conversation about the cottage. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? I asked gently. Or would you have thought I was a lonely old man afraid of losing his son to a new woman in his life? He closed his eyes. The second one. I would have thought you were being selfish. I know. That's why I had to wait. I had to let you see it for yourself. And I had to have evidence that couldn't be denied. I stood up, walked over to him, put my hand on his shoulder. She was very good at what she did, David. You're not foolish for being deceived. You're human. I almost let her destroy you. I almost helped her, but you didn't. When it mattered, when you saw the truth, you chose correctly. He started to cry then, the kind of crying I hadn't seen from him since he was a child, since the day we buried his mother. I held him, this brilliant, accomplished, 38-year-old man who I'd failed to protect from his own loving nature, and I forgave him everything. Over the following weeks, the truth about Melissa continued to unfold. The police investigation revealed she'd already started forging documents to claim power of attorney over my affairs, claiming I had early-stage dementia. She'd been planning to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized, with David's reluctant consent, and then take control of everything. Richard Thornton, when contacted by the investigators, provided additional evidence about Melissa's patterns. Apparently, I wasn't even her second target. She'd done this before, Richard, to an older man she'd briefly been engaged to, though that situation had resolved when his adult children had intervened. David broke off the engagement immediately, though Melissa fought it, claiming breach of promise, trying one last time to extract money from our family. James Patterson came out of retirement long enough to make it clear that any further contact from Melissa or her associates would result in harassment charges and civil suits. The last I heard, she'd moved to Montreal. James has a friend there keeping an informal eye on her activities. Some people never change. David moved back home for a few months while he sorted himself out emotionally. We had long conversations about manipulation tactics, about red flags, about how grief and loneliness can make people vulnerable to those who know how to exploit it. He saw a therapist, worked through the shame and betrayal. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, he told me one night over dinner. The way she always wanted to know about your finances, the way she isolated me from my friends, the way she'd cry whenever I questioned her. She was a professional, David. She'd practiced this for years. But you saw through her. I had the advantage of distance, and your mother's voice in my head, telling me to watch out for you. He smiled at that, sad but genuine. Mom always knew. 6 months after everything fell apart, David met someone new. Emma, a teacher at the school where he volunteered with a robotics program. She came for dinner one Sunday, nervous and sweet, asked permission before looking at family photos, didn't have a single question about money or property or inheritance. She's different, David told me later, after Emma had gone home. Isn't she? Very different, I agreed. A year later, they got married. A small ceremony at the cottage, the one Melissa had tried so hard to claim. Just family and close friends, exactly as it should be. Standing there, watching David and Emma exchange vows, Margaret's wedding ring in my pocket as something borrowed for the bride, I felt something settle inside me. I'd kept my promise to my wife. I'd protected our son, even when he didn't want to be protected, even when it cost me our relationship for a while. The house was still mine, the cottage was still mine, and more importantly, David was safe and happy with someone who actually loved him. That night, after the guests had left and the newlyweds had gone to bed, I sat on the dock watching the sun set over the lake. James came and sat beside me, handed me a beer. You did good, Robert. I almost lost him. But you didn't. You held steady, gathered your evidence, waited for the right moment. That's not luck. That's wisdom. Margaret would have handled it better. She would have seen through Melissa immediately, confronted it head on. Maybe. But you handled it the way you needed to handle it, and it worked. He clinked his bottle against mine. To keeping promises. To keeping promises, I echoed. The thing is, I don't think Melissa ever understood what she was really trying to take. It wasn't the money or the property, though she wanted those desperately enough. It was trust. The trust between a father and son. The legacy of a marriage built on honesty and love. The simple, priceless knowledge that family means protecting each other, even from ourselves. She forgot that some things can't be stolen, with forged documents and manufactured emergencies. Some things can only be earned through years of showing up, of keeping promises, of loving people, even when they're difficult. And some things, once you understand their true value, are worth any amount of patience to protect. David and Emma are expecting their first child now, a daughter they're naming Margaret. They asked if they could, if it would upset me. I told them their mother would be honored beyond words. Sometimes late at night, I still review that security footage, the moment when everything could have gone wrong but didn't. Not because I enjoy reliving it, but because it reminds me that vigilance isn't paranoia, that protecting the people you love sometimes means doing things they don't understand or appreciate at the time. I never gambled a single dollar, but I took the biggest gamble of my life when I chose to trust that my son would see the truth if I could just show it to him clearly enough. When I chose to believe that love and patience would outlast manipulation and greed, I won that gamble. And unlike Melissa's schemes, unlike her fraudulent accusations and manufactured crises, my victory came with something she'll never have. A clear conscience, a son who knows without doubt that his father would do anything to protect him, and a granddaughter on the way who'll grow up hearing stories about her grandmother, Margaret, the brilliant physician who knew that love means protecting people even from themselves. That's worth more than any cottage, any inheritance, any amount of money in any account. That's worth everything.